So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Martin Reeves, and I'm going to bring up his presentation. So Martin is the Senior Partner Managing Director of BCG. He's also the Global Director of BCG Henderson Institute. He's also written a book, I'm going to give you the mic in 1 second, a book that is called Your Strategy Needs a Strategy, that we should all go out and buy. Very interesting book. And then he also has done a lot of work that he's going to talk to you about in artificial intelligence. And there's a report here that I really do encourage you to all take on your way out that actually was one of the first things we read in starting to think about this conference.
We've recently carried out a piece of research with MIT on AI, and the idea is, like probably all of you, I'm in the business of dreaming about AI and selling that dream to others, but in order to implement that dream, I think we also have to know about the reality. So the idea was to go out and survey the largest number of companies possible across all industries and find out what is the reality of the understanding, the misunderstanding, the frustrations, the whole thing. So I just have an opportunity this morning to give you a brief taster of that. The report is at the back, and I think it could be quite interesting to anyone that's in the business of buying or selling AI. So the idea of the study is we surveyed about 3,000 companies around the globe, 21 industries, and the idea was to create this factual baseline against the, if you like, the sell story, the prospects for AI, to see what was working, what was real, and what wasn't real. The idea is to do this, to catch this early, but then to do this in a multi-year study, so we're interested to see how that baseline, how those expectations and those activities change over time. We did the same thing for sustainability. We tracked it across about 10 years and saw the thing go from a dream to a reality, and the reality was quite different from the initial dream, and obviously it was very different in different geographies and sectors. We're interested at this stage to pull out discriminating factors between leaders and laggards, people that are actually doing things versus people that are thinking about doing things, and to use those signals to inform anyone that's buying or selling into the space. And we also tried to open up, at least on the perception level, to some of the big topics about the reapportionment of value across industries, the future of work, these sorts of topics, which are not yet a reality, but the people already have perceptions. So probably the biggest sort of headline finding from the study is an enormous expectation gap. I survey a lot of emerging fields, but this is probably the biggest I've ever seen. So 84% of the 3,000 companies we surveyed thought that AI could be a competitive advantage for them in their industry, which obviously doesn't make any sense because 3,000 companies can't be competitively advantaged. But in terms of what this is based upon, I guess we could say that the sell side of AI has done a very nice job in creating some very strong expectations, but it's not actually informed by very much reality today. Only 5% of companies are actually using AI in any sort of extensive sort of way, and about only 23% are using any AI at all if we include very broad definition, including pilots or single applications. So I think there are already some implications from this. I mean, I think it would say that we're at the stage where we need to educate the market. We should probably assume that the majority of our clients and will probably have a lot of misperceptions, and I'm going to show you some of those misperceptions. We should probably expect extreme differences between educated and uneducated companies. So I think it's one of those, in my book I distinguish 5 species of strategy, and one of them is I call shaping strategies, which is where you actually shape and educate and create a market. I think we're at the stage of creating a market. If we look at the expectation, I'm not sure whether you can see the axes, but this is the expectation today and in 5 years' time across these 3,000 companies for the impact of AI on processes and the impact of AI on offerings, products and services. It's really quite stunning how today there isn't very much impact because people are not doing very much, but across all sectors, including the laggard sectors are things like energy and the public sector, as well as the early adopter segments like consumer goods and technology, that basically everybody's expecting a massive uptake in their business across the next 5 years. So a couple of observations there. That's great in terms of creating the dynamics of expectations. I think that's good for investment bankers. That's good for consultants. I think it's a very dangerous dynamic in the sense that there's going to be a lot of disappointment. a lot of disillusionment, a lot of education that needs to go in that process, and also a lot of competitive differentiation. Clearly, 84% of the companies are not going to come out of this competitively advantaged. So it's going to be a bit of a zoo, and I think, so in addition, you all know this I'm sure, but in addition to the technological fundamentals here, I think we've got a huge job to do in terms of shaping perceptions and competences. It's as much an education job as it is a technology job, given that. Also, if you think about the amount of data that's based upon, it basically says that nobody really knows. We've been dealing with pure expectations at this point. Nobody really knows how it will be. It's a classic embryonic market with very, very high uncertainty associated with it. We segmented the zoo into 4 categories based upon understanding and activity level. We tried to be neutral because you see these things like the digital maturity index, which is sort of the implication is if you're not doing much, you must be an idiot. So we actually didn't call our lowest category idiots. We called them passives. Even that maybe is slightly judgmental, but the idea was we were interested in whether the prudence is reasoned prudence or whether it's just stupidity or whatever it was. So we're interested to look at these different levels of activity and figure out what are people thinking, how are they thinking in each of these different categories. And actually, the pattern is very, very interesting. So in a very, very embryonic market, what you tend to see is that the pioneers have the highest expectations. But actually, we don't really see that here. The market is maybe stage 2 in the sense that actually the pioneers are the ones that are struggling the most with some really fundamental problems that the passives don't even realize are problems yet. So it's that sort of pattern. So if you look at the pattern of concerns, the ones, so the dark green bars here are the passives, and that's the right-hand side of the page. These are the barriers to adoption of AI in your company. You can see that the dark green bars are some really basic stuff, like management doesn't understand it, we don't have a business plan, management doesn't support it, we don't have the people to do technology, etc. So it's very, very basic things. If you look at the concerns of the light green bars on the left, which are the pioneers, actually the pioneers are beginning to struggle with real things, like you bump into privacy concerns, you bump into regulatory concerns, you bump into the lack of an explanatory component with most implementations of AI, whereby you have an answer, but you can't explain why the answer is the answer to your customers or to the regulators. These are real problems. And so in a sense, this is a good sign of the reality of the market at the pioneer end of the spectrum. I don't have time to show it to you today, but it's clear that the passives and the experimenters, which are the majority of the market, actually fundamentally misunderstand some very basic things about AI. For example, they may believe that the advantage resides in the algorithm and may not appreciate the importance of actually owning a data set, including negative data. They may believe that you can buy an algorithm just as much as you buy an ERP system. They may believe that it's something that you can buy, again, neglecting the importance of the access to the data. So again, that's a big plus for anybody that actually has an educational component to their business. So as this thing progresses, we'll be looking at, in addition to these sort of baseline basic topics, we'll be interested in looking at the strategic aspects, the things which differentiate companies. Today, the things that differentiate companies are pretty basic, right? It's, are you doing something? Are you not doing something? Do you have people or not? Do you have a business plan for AI or not? So only 50% of companies in the sample actually have, by any loose definition, any sort of plan for their AI. They all plan to have plans, but only 50% have plans today. So today, the advantage is pretty primitive. But over time, of course, we would expect that the ownership of data sets, the ability to learn faster than your competitors, experience curve effects will start to yield competitive advantage. We're going to track that. We're interested in how AI will shift value pools. For instance, in healthcare, certain attractors specify who captures value today, and we're interested in, does that change over time in terms of who owns the data, who owns the algorithm, and so on. We're going to track that. It's too early to do that right now, but that would be very interesting. We're also interested in the future of work topic. By and large, the current perceptions of this 3,000 sample, I think, are actually sort of quite mature in the sense that people see on the whole, see that that AI, when it takes off, will redefine tasks, and that will trigger a great need for retraining, for the acquisition of new skills, but they're not falsely equating individual tasks with whole processes, with whole companies. So they're not actually seeing aggregate unemployment resulting from this. But again, that's just a perception. We're interested to actually track those early job losses, job gains, and reskillings as the survey moves forward. So here's the study. You guys are more expert on the substance of this than I am. You're living it and breathing it. So I'd love your feedback on the study, and also any thoughts on what you'd like to see in next year's study. We've got 1 second left, which is probably enough time for one question, if I might be so bold. Anybody got an obvious question on the work? Yes, sir.
Is there a correlation between the passives being smaller firms and pioneers being larger firms? Is that a fair correlation, or is it
I think we see.
regulated?
I think we see both actually. So we certainly see. So one of the some of the people we spoke to, we did an extensive, in-depth interview program too, and companies like Airbus, who is a big pioneer, were interested to talk to us. You can read all about their case study in the book. And of course, the small companies with all of the talent and the algorithms that the big companies are buying, they're in there too. So the interesting thing is, I'd say in a sense, we've got a spectrum of ignorance here, and the spectrum of ignorance spans industries and sizes, I would say. I'll give you a specific example. In insurance, again, we have permission to use it on a named basis. Ping An, the Chinese insurance company, has hundreds of people on CEO initiatives and tens of implementations of AI, and is an advanced player in facial recognition. Other major global insurers that remain unnamed have a study group, and that's a pretty typical pattern within an industry. Absolutely huge differences in activity level. Okay, yes, sir.
I had a question about the application of AI in developing countries, and to what extent did your survey include them, and whether they are active or passive, depending upon the cost implications of implementing AI.
Right. So the report actually, for reasons of space, didn't contain a lot of geographical split out, because we didn't, to be honest, we didn't get in the first year of the survey, we didn't get a fully representative geographical cut. But I think we see activity and interest in, quite broadly geographically, and of course, depending on, we're actually working on a visual atlas. We're going to call it the atlas of the global atlas of digital hegemony, which is about the global fight for digital dominance, and from those maps and this data, I think we can see that there's, definitely China has a fighting chance of being a global leader here. Europe has a bigger uphill battle to face actually, and we see some very interesting things happening in Russia, in Israel. So it's not America versus the rest by any means. Again, an enormous spread that sort of defies any traditional categorization, I think.